Hello everyone, this is part 22 of What If Naruto Formed a New Team, and I hope you guys enjoy this video and to like, to subscribe, to share, and check out the playlist. To see more, comment down below. Now let's start the intro.
They call me a god. They call me a god. They call me a god.
Join my membership, the perks are great. It's in the description. The room was quiet and her palms felt sweaty, worse than they had when Gaara had cornered her. Now Sakura watched Akamaru sleep peacefully on the table ahead, on his way to recovery. After Kiba's sister had left and assured him that his Ninken would be fine, Sakura had stayed with him. For a while she had just watched his stare migrate between the clock, his puppy and the floor, she herself feeling terribly lost. "You're still my friend, right, Sakura?" he had asked after a long while. The pink-haired girl sighed, and came to stand behind the chair he'd been slumped over in. Kiba couldn't bring himself to look at her. Sakura hugged his shoulders, and his ruffled mop of spiky hair was surprisingly soft beneath her chin while she reassured him, "I'm always going to be your friend, Kiba-kun." "Why would that change after all of this?" "Because I thought you'd be upset if we couldn't bring him back." Kiba answered softly, then corrected himself, "Because I thought you'd be upset if I didn't bring him back." "Why would I blame you?" Her voice rose in pitch, agitated. "I'm the one who messed up, remember? How could you think I'd be mad at something like that?" He smiled weakly, his mouth lopsided on his face. "I don't know. I guess I just wanted to protect what you guys had after I'd been watching you two, wondering what to do with myself." Kiba admitted, "I just didn't want you to be sad is all, Sakura. What we had. You know it wasn't that much." Sakura snorted inelegantly, her temper flaring at the thought. She walked over to where Akamaru lay and began to stroke his white head and added, "And, whatever the heck it was, it sure wasn't your job to keep it together. You're not an outsider looking in, Kiba, you were my friend from the moment you let me pet Akamaru. How could you think Sasuke would get in the way of that? He's pushy like that." He supplied feebly and then stopped talking. His feelings were still hurt and he couldn't understand how Sakura could be so calm about the whole situation. At first he had thought he'd been most distressed over Akamaru's condition, but Hana had quickly laid his fears to rest. It wasn't long after that the dreadful feeling returned again, though, and he realized it couldn't simply be his failure that was worrying him. He had relied on Sasuke and respected him. Kiba remembered the few times when he had gotten into a spat with the Uchiha, but they had never quarreled long or violently. He found himself reaching for friendship rather than rivalry, and had come to trust his teammate without question. With him gone, it felt as if he and Sakura had been abandoned, like he went ahead to get something that he thought was better than us. He tossed us aside like an old shoe. What did we mean to him anyway? He never made that clear, and I let myself believe that he was my friend. I'm just a big idiot. Kiba rubbed his watering eyes after Sakura had begun to stare at him. He gave up after a moment and decided not to hide it. He was sad and she knew it too. And even when she wouldn't show it, Kiba was aware that Sakura was taking Sasuke's betrayal the hardest. She just wants to protect everyone by hiding how she feels. In the end it won't do much good. Hiding it is just as bad as lying. Sakura wasn't sure if it would be wise to explain to Kiba that what he had believed existed between her and Sasuke was, in fact, a reality with herself and Gaara. Just the thought of the red-haired nin raised her spirits, but she felt it was unfair to Kiba to not be showing remorse. She did feel pain over what had happened, but Gaara had turned out to be an overpowering drug that filled her with joy. That was something she doubted her teammate would understand. Kakashi did not knock when he walked in, and he didn't have his nose buried in his book either. "Kakashi-sensei." Sakura took a step forward and then halted, feeling the need to explain herself if he didn't already know what had transpired. "I'm sorry. I could have done something earlier, but I acted dumb and let Sasuke-kun leave. I wish now that I had done more. I'm sorry." He closed his visible eye briefly. "No, Sakura. I'm the one who owes you both an apology. Because I let Sasuke get swept up in all of this chaos, he ran to power instead of his friends, thinking it was the right path. Now you have to suffer because of it. I'm the one who's sorry, Sakura. Maybe if I was a better friend then he may have wanted to stay." Kiba spoke up, thinking it over. "I always acted like I understood everything, but I didn't really. I wouldn't know how Sasuke feels completely because my sis would never betray me the way Itachi did him. I could have done more if I'd put myself in his place. Don't say that, Kakashi patted the boy's head, you can't expect to be perfect, you know. You did all that you could and that certainly doesn't mean you did anything wrong. But, Kakashi-sensei, when are we going out again to find him? Sakura asked eagerly, we can still bring him back, right? He looked at her for a long moment, guiltily, there's nothing we can do beyond this point. Sasuke is with Sound now, and the only way he'll be coming back is if he does it himself. So this is how our team ends, huh? Kiba growled bitterly to himself, we get one try to make things right and when we don't succeed it's all for nothing. It wasn't the right comment for that moment. The bold facade that Sakura had been upholding crumbled at the harsh words the Inuzuka had spoken, and she caved, beginning to cry in the face of the truth of things. It had been something Gaara had stalled her from doing, but it was inevitable nonetheless. Kiba, regretting his acrimony, stood from his chair and hugged her in apology. He didn't want her to be sad, but try as he might it was unavoidable, for the both of them. Our team isn't s. Kakashi told them, his voice stern, as long as you remain loyal to each other your friendship can never be broken. In the scheme of things, this is only a wake-up call. Be glad we're all here and alive right now, because there will be times we'll be less fortunate. Kiba nodded, watching his sensei's face, obscured as it was, and found new strength welling up in his sea. Sakura calmed down as well and she hoped that the future, as perilous as Kakashi predicted it to be, would hold some remedy for their pain. Chuki watched his only two customers stare at their ramen bowls. The silent funk they were in had him extremely anxious, and after hearing of the uproar many Konoha ninja had been in a few days before, he was hesitant to ask them where Haku-kun was. What's wrong boys? He asked softly, do you want me to bring you something else? Gaara wearily took a nip at his ramen, saying nothing. Naruto was too lost in thought remembering all that had happened to eat his miso. Jiraiya sighed deeply, staring at the both of them intently, listen. We all need to have a long chat about what's just happened. Naruto felt something fluttering in him. Out with it, then. Gaara snapped, anxious, and his mentor didn't blame him for it either. Naruto was too distraught to make a snappy comment. He was sick with worry. As of now, Haku is in stable condition, Jiraiya notified them, however, both Naruto and Gaara flinched at the insensitive adverb, his cursed seal is beyond my ability to restrain. There's no way I can barricade it now that it's gotten so out of hand. But Ero-sensei you know that he wouldn't use it unless he had to. Naruto reminded, he couldn't help it. If he didn't use it then he might have gotten K. But the trade-off is just as bad if not worse, his teacher retorted, please understand that every time Haku uses that seal it gives Orochimaru more and more control over him. It's become too dangerous now. He's going to be a huge target in sound being that Snake Bastard doesn't want any wasted opportunities, if you get my meaning. Gaara agreed with Naruto despite the details, even if he is a target he really is the least promising one. Haku-kun won't use the cursed seal ever again and that leaves Orochimaru at the disadvantage. There's no way to be sure about that. Jiraiya said darkly, when push comes to shove, Haku is as morally stubborn as you two, but there are some things that tempt even him, I should think. That said, how about we go see him now? Naruto interrupted, officiously, we've only been waiting for forever. Again Jiraiya relented and he nodded to them, come on then. I should warn you he's not a pleasant sight. He's asleep now and he probably won't wake up for a while. They followed Jiraiya impatiently out of the waiting room and into the corridor, desperate to see their friend. They had only just woken but they felt more alert than ever now that their patience had paid off. They rounded a corner and Jiraiya opened a door on their immediate left, in here. They entered and were met with the dismal sight of their teammate bedridden and hooked up to an IV. Naruto and Gaara immediately went closer, grimacing at the small bruises and burns lining his exposed arms. A few scratches remained on his porcelain face. Haku was incapacitated but at least he was alive. That was all Naruto had to know. He plopped down into the chair beside the bed and watched his friend with a relieved smile. Gaara, in contrast, shook furiously at the sight of Haku so badly injured. He knew he'd never be able to let Sasuke get away with it. Jiraiya laid a hand on the redhead's shoulder, sensing his mounting rage. Cool it, Gaara. Make a habit of not living in the past. You'll be more helpful to Haku if you're not seeking vengeance. He relaxed a bit for the first time in a long while, agreeing with his teacher. And not a moment later Sunid strolled in and blinked at the intruders in surprise. Is this a reunion party or something? I just got here, so everyone get out while I check him. She barked, and they swiftly scuttled out of the room, shrinking away from her fiery gaze. Naruto finally began to eat his ramen, and then suggested sidelong to Gaara, we'll go visit Haku-kun later when Bar-chan's less stressed. I have no objection to that. Gaara agreed. Seeing the tension had dissipated, Chuki relaxed, supposing they were fine after all. Lee had run up the stairs of the apartment building excitedly, careful with the box he had with him. Up a few levels and near the end of an echoing hallway he located a door and knocked with his elbow, for his hands were full. Tenten, are you ready? He called and he knew she could hear him. In fact, she had heard him as he had animatedly pranced through the main level door. The Kunoichi exited her apartment and Lee blinked, seeing she was dressed differently. Again she was in a Chinese-style top, but it was red, and with the contrasting black of her pants the colors made him see the spinning tomo of the Sharingan for a second. Lee shuddered at the thought and then considered the two colors totally innocent. Wow, who knew you'd be the happiest now that visitors are allowed? Tenten smiled, locking the door behind her. What's with all the stuff? I was not sure what sort of presents he would want, so I collected as many as I thought appropriate. Lee admitted, grinning, and then eyed the items she had with her. I see you have not brought very much. Nope. She tucked the parcels beneath her arm. Less is more with Neji. Let's get going now, and then we can argue over who has the better presents. They set out and Tenten found that perhaps Lee had in fact brought better gifts than she had. She had gathered a few valuable things she had lying around that she would certainly be saddened to part with, but Lee had gone out of his way and bought a dozen too many things that he hoped Neji would be pleased with. He's outdone me this time. Tenten thought to herself, actually, he does that a lot. Once at the hospital they met up with Guy in the lobby who was waiting for them, grinning just as widely as Lee. He too had brought offerings to their recovering teammate, and Tenten was beginning to suspect they were trying to surpass her generosity on purpose. What's that? Tenten asked curiously, gesturing to the heavy case Guy had with him. As they went up to the second floor, her teacher gave her a proud look. These are training weights much like the ones dear Lee has. Something tells me our prodigy would appreciate a more practical gift than some flowers and the such like. Tenten was floored. I feel like a cheapskate now. I brought 3 things and they're nothing really special. What's with these 2 today? Unlike they would have normally, Team Guy made a quiet, careful entrance into the recovery room of Hyuga Neji. They found him fast asleep in bed, bandaged, but visibly unharmed for the most part. The excitement faded from both Lee and Guy's faces to see that they could not cheerily greet him. Tsunade-sama said that he may be asleep for a while. Tenten explained to them softly, can you blame him? He suffered through so much. Indeed, but all along I knew he would be fine. Guy decided, his grin returning, let's set these aside for him and he can see them after he wakes. They proceeded as instructed, and it was then Tenten got a glimpse of the rabble in Lee's box. She could see he had bought almost every sort of candy that was available in Hidden Leaf, and condensed it into one, chaotically organized pile tied together with string and ribbon. Beside the mountain of sweets were a set of new kunai and shuriken, which she gazed at jealously, and tape for wrapping his arms during training. There was a framed picture of their team which Iruka-sensei had taken once they'd graduated. Were we ever that ridiculous looking? Well, it was thoughtful of him, though, and next to it, a stuffed, plush giraffe that absolutely melted her heart, and she was almost tempted to ask Lee if she could have it if Neji didn't like it. The box of goodies was set atop the weight case on the bedside table, and Tenten laid her gifts beside it, inspecting them, hoping they too would be appreciated. She had written up 2 scrolls the day before, sealing them with many, perhaps too many, sharp, polished, new weapons that she intended to teach him how to summon. The scrolls rested on top of a box of wrapped dango she had gotten, and was all tied to the top of an old, seemingly interesting book she had swiped from one of the shelves in her room. I've never read it, but the looks interesting. Maybe he'll like it. It was after fawning over the presents she wished she would be waking to that Tenten turned to see Guy and Lee staring silently at Neji. It was eerie and she wondered what had them so bemused. Tenten glanced over to the slumbering Hyuga and then noticed what had caught their attention. His hair, The long, dark, silky tresses she had come to so greatly adore, was just above the shoulder in a short, choppy mess that appeared as if it had been done in a great hurry. It is just so strange, Lee cried, halfway between grinning in amusement and frowning in disapproval. I have never seen Neji with short hair. Not even when he was young when we first attended the academy, it has always been long. He just looks so very un-Neji-like, Guy supplied, and his protege nodded in agreement. Tenten was quick to the Hyuga's defense. Will you see it out? Stop critiquing him like there's something he can do about it or you'll be getting a haircut next. No, both Lee and Guy cried, grabbing each other, fearful of having their bowl cuts touched. Tenten sighed, a small smirk dawning on her lips. You guys know I was kidding, right? They relaxed, but Lee, ever perceptive and attuned to the emotions of his female teammate, whispered something imperceptible to his sensei, and Guy nodded in understanding a moment later. Tenten rolled her eyes at their secrecy. Well now, it's about time I go check on my eternal rival before he lets his guard down. I will challenge him to a contest of honor. Guy announced, please excuse me Lee, Tenten, I'll take my leave now. Let me know when our prodigy rises. Without missing a beat he left the room and closed the door behind him. Tenten looked at Lee, decisively, I get it. You don't have to make an excuse if you want to go too, Lee. I know you both wanted to see him when he was awake. Her teammate nodded, yes, well, I am just unsure if it would be right to leave you here all alone. He smiled, I was not going to make an excuse anyway. She grinned, so thoroughly grateful for his friendship. Lee waited with her for a long while, waiting patiently for any signs of their teammate waking. Time ticked by uneventfully and Tenten invested her claim on the stuffed giraffe if Neji happened to reject it. Lee gave her permission to adopt the plushie should it not meet the Hyuga's satisfaction. An hour or two approximately had passed and Lee had gotten up and stretched, declaring that he was going out for lunch. He tried to persuade her to come along and when she didn't, he acknowledged inwardly that Tenten was not the type to leave someone's side for any stretch of time, not without a struggle first. Sometimes I wish she loved me that way, he thought to himself, and his smile flickered painfully on his face for a moment. Devotion like that is hard to come by. I can only hope that someday Neji will recognize it, and at least honor it if he cannot accept it. Lee steeled his nerves, forbidding himself from moving on to jealous, heated thoughts. Come out for lunch soon, Tenten. Please do not stay in here all day. I will, she said airily, I'll meet you in a little while, Lee. He left silently and gently shut the door after him. Tenten sat in her chair for a long moment, staring at Neji's face. He was tranquil and it was the first time in a long time she had seen him in such a state. A few minutes passed before her voice broke the silence of the room. Will you wake up now that it's just me, Neji? I know Lee and Guy Sensei make you uncomfortable when you're not feeling well. He remained silent and still. Tenten sighed, watching his sleeping face, not fighting the affectionate creatures that she so often squashed when they began to dance around in her sea. She didn't feel like combating against the way she felt anymore. Denying it was more tiring than trying to make her hopes a reality. Just look at you, you look more like a kid now than you did when you were a kid. She laughed aloud, finding the way his choppy hair framed his face silly. I liked your hair better when it was longer, just like Lee said. I hope it grows back quick. Her sea hurt a little. She hadn't laughed in a long time and it felt like an alien action. More than anything, Tenten had wanted him to share in her fits of laughter with her, at least once. He never had. The closest she had gotten to a joyful snort with Neji was a good-natured snicker after seeing Lee drunk at a celebration they had once he'd mastered front lotus. Even something as small as a rude chuckle Tenten could remember, because any sign of humanity in Neji was something she would desperately cling to and nurture. If I told you how I feel you wouldn't take me seriously anymore. She thought sadly, sometimes I come close. Sometimes I think everything would be alright if I just said it. But you aren't like Lee. Once I stop being strong you'll push me away. Is the only way I can stay with you is if I always stay tough and sharp. Would you ever respect the parts of me that are soft and gentle too? Tenten rubbed at her nose, sniffling, why are you such a jerk like that? I love you. Won't you just say that that's okay? Can't we just always be together and the rest not matter? I don't know how much more I can put up with seeing you get hurt and then hide how I feel. We're all going to S one day, you know. Just say you'd rather S with me than anyone else and then I'll be alright. She touched his hand tentatively, hating the stinging feeling in her eyes. For a moment she was confused. His skin was soft and smooth, something she hadn't expected from a ninja who specialized in taijutsu. Vain. I did not expect that. It was a rare time where she found herself engaging in a tender activity with the Hyuga. Tenten did so selfishly, glad he was asleep. If he had been awake she'd sooner chop off her own hand. She was all too obsessed with keeping her affections under wraps when Neji was conscious, unwilling to jeopardize the few fond words she had worked so hard to earn from him. When she was quite through petting him, Tenten stood, taking a deep breath, recalling how Lee was expecting her. I'll be back soon, she said quietly over her shoulder, and the door clicked shut behind her. Later on, Tsunade had vacated the hospital and Naruto and Gaara were quick to visit the debilitated teammate. They snuck in, Naruto doing most of the sneaking, unnecessarily so, and when they reached Haku's room Gaara had been startled by Naruto's shrill cry of joy. You're awake. He sailed across the room and nearly gave the dark-haired boy a heart attack. Gaara hissed at him to keep his voice down after he too walked in, but his annoyed mood immediately disappeared at the sight of his friend alert and smiling blithely. It's good to see you too, Naruto-kun. Haku felt his face get crushed against the blonde's shoulder after he was assaulted with a cheerful hug. Oh. Careful, that hurts. Sorry. Naruto backed off, grinning. Well, you're up now, finally. We were worried sick. How are you feeling? His friend blinked and answered, I've been better, sore for the most part. Tsunade-sama said there's still some bruising on my ribs but she'll look at them later. His eyes reflected concern a moment later. And Naruto, were you able to bring Sasuke back? It was quiet and Haku watched Gaara's eyes close briefly at the words. His heart sank. He knew the answer even before Naruto explained how things had worked out, and how close he had come to losing his life. Haku was silent after hearing the retelling of the mission. He felt absolutely terrible that he had allowed Sasuke to defect to sound. He wasn't your responsibility, Haku-kun. Gaara reminded him, sensing his friend's guilt. What happened is nothing you should take personally. We're all here now and everyone is alive. That is all that matters. But I tried my best. I thought that if I went beyond my limits like I could do something about it, Haku admitted, feeling ashamed. None of it was enough. What was the use of any of it? No, Naruto interjected, a growl in his teeth. It's my fault he didn't get dragged back here. I had the chance to bring Sasuke back. He was weak and I could have taken him out but I just chose not to. I was an idiot. I'm the one who should be sorry, Haku-kun. I messed up. You're not to blame, Naruto-kun. Haku said softly. In a way, he doubted anyone was more to blame than anyone else. Sasuke had hurt them all equally. They had all suffered because of his actions, and now were left to wonder if there was anything we could have done differently so we may have been successful. Haku watched curiously as Naruto created a shadow clone and sent it out of the room. Gaara paid no mind, as if he had done something totally expected. Noting the dark-haired boy's puzzlement, Naruto explained himself, Ero-sensei wanted to talk to you when you woke up, but I don't feel like going to tell him myself. Gaara snickered at Naruto's ingenuity. The blonde then proceeded to gossip to Haku, recounting how Gaara was totally obsessed with making out with Sakura-chan. Yeah, that's right. He really her. Haku laughed so hard at the statement that he tore some of his chaise. He was gasping in pain in between chuckles, clutching his fragile sides. Gaara volunteered to fetch a nurse to patch his friend up. Hinata watched her father pour tea for the both of them from across the table. He had been listening quietly while she had been recounting her struggle against Kabuto. They were seated out on the porch in the afternoon light, and while Hinata described how she perceived things with her Byakugan, her father's expression became progressively softer. Her story reflected all the peril and pain she had been in, and she could sense him grow tense at some dangerous parts. When she had finished her tale she apologized. I'm sorry that I didn't say anything about the pain sooner, father. Hinata lowered her head, submissively and took a timid sip of her tea. It was pungently sweet, a sharp contrast to the bitter herbal teas her father often favored. She inwardly suspected he knew of her preference for sweeter flavors. Hinata, she looked up in alarm when he finally spoke, you should have been truthful. You should have shed light on your condition earlier in the event it may have been fatal to your health. I would not have been cross with you over something you had no control over. I worried over it so much I was afraid you'd be upset, Hinata admitted softly. I won't ever hesitate again, father. He nodded in understanding and she let out a low sigh of relief. Hiashi continued again. The Byakugan has had genetic variations before in the history of the Hyuga, but these occurrences are very rare. Often they show no dramatic change from the original bloodline, in the records we've kept. She felt like using her Byakugan again, wanting to show her father what she could see until she reminded herself that he wouldn't be able to. Hinata was frustrated she couldn't properly demonstrate just how different her Kekkei Genkai had become. I believe that we both need to learn more about your new ability before we can draw any conclusions about it, Hiashi decided and added, I'd never expected one of my daughters to acquire such a skill, but you have shown greatness before, Hinata. I would expect no less of my child. Hinata smiled widely and the gesture unconsciously drew a small grin from her father as well. Thank you, father. I don't think I should keep Hanabi waiting much longer. I promised to tell her all about the mission. You may speak with your sister in a moment. When her father requested her to wait, she knew he had more to say. You had mentioned him before briefly and I was informed by Hikun-kun that Uzumaki Naruto defended you during the more serious fighting, correct? That's true, father. She confirmed it proudly. Then I'll ask you to send him my gourd. He said coolly, surprising her with his generous attitude. All the same, she was thrilled her father was suddenly being so agreeable, and she hoped things could stay so pleasant between them. Hinata was beaming when she responded, I will tell him, father. She stood from her seat, only half finished with her tea. The Hyuga girl had only taken a few steps from the porch before her father stopped her again. Hinata. She faced him respectfully, wondering what more he had to say. Please remember that your mouth, no matter how eager it may be, is only to belong to your future husband, understood? Hiashi smirked at her red face, uncommonly calm after seeing her affectionate interactions for the first time. Hinata felt her stomach do what she would classify as a jackhammer motion up into her brain. Terror and joy flooded her mind all at once at the realization her father was aware of her young love. Strange how he took it all in stride, or perhaps he's embarrassing me on purpose to make a point that I should not be with Naruto-kun, not yet, anyway. She didn't say it then, but she couldn't really care less about the prospect of her future husband. She already had what she wanted, but she doubted her father would want to hear about it. Hinata agreed quietly with him and then padded away across the lawn to find her sister. Unknown to her was that her father watched her leave, laughing happily to himself. Night had descended and by cover of darkness his eyes finally batted open. Neji looked around, immediately aware of his hospital room, its dimensions, smell, as well as the exact location on the second floor. Mostly because he had inadvertently activated his Byakugan when he woke up and his head was flooded with images. He needed more information. His head turned slowly, dreadfully heavy on his shoulders, and on the wall to his right a digital clock read 1:08 a.m. in red block letters, morning. The question is how long I've actually been out and what was the result of the mission. Quickly Neji recalled how Tenten had fetched him. I'm grateful to her. I may not have survived if I wasn't found sooner. He often relied on her to watch his back in almost any situation, and even when he appeared to be alone and outclassed, she still arrived to protect him. It felt to him that God was asking him to stop taking advantage of her omnipresence. I will gladly oblige. She had become valuable to him in so many other respects that he rarely ever viewed her as a shield any longer. Tenten had almost become like his right hand, reading and obeying his thoughts and perfectly in sync with him, just as lethal as he was. After commanding his stiff muscles to move, Neji sat up in the bed. He scratched his chin absent-mindedly and it was then he noticed the presence, or the lack thereof, of his hair. The tips felt jagged but brushed softly against his palm. He tested the length, estimating it, and was quickly disgusted. Within 15 seconds of being conscious I already have a reason to be irritable. And Lee was always telling him to cheer up, like he'd understand. Lee supported the notion of ridiculous haircuts judging from his hairstyle. Neji actually was, to a degree, concerned with his appearance, more than Lee was, at any rate. He was too tired and aching to care very much what he looked like at the moment. He'd first tend to his fundamental needs, and later to the psychological trauma of his hair. Neji inspected his torso, approving of how all that remained were faint crescent scars on his skin. I've been mended well. Perhaps Tsunade-sama is responsible. He'd thank her later. He hadn't been too crazy at first about a female Hokage, but after Tenten's delighted speeches and his own life rescued by said village leader, his respect had been more than earned. A moment later he made note of something quite urgent. He was starving. Neji's mind went to the notion of food. Obviously, there was no way he could get any at 1 in the morning, and he certainly wasn't going to wound his pride and cry to a nurse pathetically for sustenance. So he decided to make do with the gifts he found piled high beside his bed. He reached for the packaged dumplings and candy, inspecting the sour flavors from the sweet. He kept the sour ones and tossed the sweet morsels back in Lee's box. Neji sat cross-legged on top of the sheets, sampling the candy in between bites of dango. He remembered the last time Tenten and Lee had fed him, and silently he thanked them for providing him with nourishment again. After a few minutes of eating in the dark and not enjoying it, Neji scooted over to the edge of the bed and switched on the lamp for some light. It burned his pale eyes momentarily, but it was preferable to the yawning shadows about the place. He finished his munching and tossed the rubbish left over into a wastebasket in the corner. The cold tile floor bit at his feet and he swiftly returned back to the warm bed, moving to inspect his many gifts which, he believed, he had truly earned. Neji extracted the stuffed giraffe from the box, blinking at it. It's an agreeable animal. One of the few creatures he didn't dislike. He propped it up against his pillow, deciding to come back to it later. The weights Guy had supplied he was also intending to keep for later training purposes. The only non-food item remaining on the table was the tattered old book Tenten had left for him. He lifted the blank hardcover inquisitively, and opened it to its page, The First Shinobi. Neji found the concept strange, but decided to read it anyway since he had little else to do. The front cover indicated it had been printed in the Land of Stone. He leaned against his pillow on the headboard and opened the book towards the light. Once he was comfortable he let his eyes begin to scan the page. Ukiguru was a young field hand on his father's farm in the Land of Stone. He was just shy of 20, with hair of autumn gold and sinewy, tan skin rubbed rough and dirty from endless hours working crops. He lived in a small village at the base of a great mountain, and he and his father had heard of the recent formation of separate government B. A daimyo had been instated to rule over each of the infant countries. The reformer who had started the entire movement, according to the rumors Ukiguru had heard, was a powerful, mysterious warrior who was called the Sage of the Six Paths. What wise man would walk more than one road? Ukiguru's father had pondered at the I doubt there are 6 ways to lead a righteous life. Remember, my son, walk no path but your own. The new era had defined clear country borders and established capitals, and also put an end to the wandering, thieving tribes that went from town to town pillaging unsuspecting villages. Peace was restored, even if the so-called Rokadu Sennin was said to have single-handedly defeated entire armies sent by lords who opposed his ideals. Ukiguru believed such power was beyond human comprehension. He was glad he did not have to get swept up into such fantastic matters. One day while working in a field of rice, Ukiguru saw a small troop marching down a road parallel to the rice paddy he was laboring in. 3 people walked in single file, 2 of which spoke quietly amongst each other. The man at the front had caught Ukiguru's attention. His every feature wild and untamed, his black hair was long and unruly. He was dressed richly in fine garments and armor, and had a necklace of fangs adorning his bee. What was most hypnotic about the stranger, however, were his glowing, violet eyes, ringed irises lit with intense purpose and knowledge. Such eyes spoke volumes to the young farmer. You can see me. You must understand, then, that I am no phantom, young man. Ukiguru dropped his rake and stared across the road. The procession of 3 had stopped, and the violet-eyed man's 2 jabbering followers fell silent and watched him from their place behind their master. The strange man had not spoken a word. Without the use of his tongue he had reached out to Ukiguru through his fantastic eyes. Ukiguru was fearful, but heeded the words that entered his mind with a disembodied voice. You will suffice. You, like several before you, have seen that I am no mere human. The question is, my friend, will you join me now or will you stand there and pass up an opportunity to become something great? I'm not much of anyone. The boy replied quietly, doubting his own destiny. If you don't believe that you can become something more, then you simply won't. Stay here and work if you like, boy. If not, come with me and you will open the door to countless possibilities. Ukiguru did not think he was anything special. He was an only child and his mother had when he was young. He had few friends and had never ventured outside of his village before. Yet on a whim of reckless curiosity, Ukiguru decided to hold fast to courage. He stumbled out of the rice paddy, his pants soaked and muddy, and without even thinking to go home and change his clothes, pack his belongings, or say farewell to his father, Ukiguru fell in step with the two people following the violet-eyed warrior. He said nothing to Ukiguru after he had joined the procession, but his two companions were quick to greet him. So you must be the representative from this land he was looking for, a young woman had said. It's nice to meet you. Now I suppose we will be turning south again to look for a person from the realm of wind. Excuse me, but I'm afraid I do not understand. Ukiguru had admitted. You mean to say that he is looking for people specifically? Yes and no. A man beside the young woman had replied. If you meet Rokudo Sennin's requirements he will take you. If you don't he just walks on. Don't ask me how he chooses, though, that even I don't understand. Ukiguru gathered that at least the person they were following was the famed sage of the six paths. Even though he had earlier believed that he didn't want to get involved in such feuding ideals of new government and clans, Ukiguru had decided to stay with the Rokudo Sennin and his disciples, knowing he'd never get such an opportunity again in his life. Later, while traveling over a mountain path south to new lands, he had learned that the young woman was a scholar from the realm of water. She called herself Fei-sun. The young man had given his name after Ukiguru had humbly introduced himself. You're a farmer, you say? How strange. I am Lord Shishio, the ruler of the realm of lightning. Fei-sun frowned at his boasting. Yes, that is truly wondrous, Shishio-sama, but I do not think that Rokudo Sennin has chosen us for our class or stature. It must be something more. Indeed it must, Shishio agreed. When a peasant and a lord are measured on equal ground, spirit and character must be weighed in such an event. Then after Shishio was kind to Ukiguru, and treated him and Fei-sun as equals. Rokudo Sennin said nothing on the matter. They stopped to eat only when and where their master allowed them. They never questioned his words, for when Rokudo Sennin grew impatient or frustrated, he began to speak through his eyes again and it frightened them terribly. Once they reached the realm of wind they passed through many villages. None of the people they came upon seemed to be the type Rokudo Sennin would take interest in. It was after a kind schoolteacher named Nenmaru offered them shelter from the cold desert night did the sage respond. His eyes spoke to Nenmaru just as they had for Ukiguru and his companions. The following day Nenmaru joined them on their journey. He became fast friends with Ukiguru, for Nenmaru was timid and reserved. Compassionate and outgoing, Ukiguru always respected the schoolteacher's wisdom and morals. After entering the land of fire they were quick to discover their last representative in a fiery young artisan who was inquisitive and determined. He was a master metal worker named Konohate and was in awe of Rokudo Sennin's prowess and natural leadership. After collecting all of his followers, the sage returned to his castle on a rainy hilltop, and introduced them to his eldest son, Tasaisha, who would also be joining their fellowship. Tasaisha had the same eyes as his father. You have all been gathered here to be taught the divine art of ninjutsu, the sage had told them. It is a gift that not only I possess, and you all can learn such abilities if you surrender yourselves to my instruction. Ninjutsu. What sort of art is that? Konohate had complained. My forging is enough art for me, thanks. I'd much rather go home to my wife and children. Silence, you whelp. Tasaisha had scolded him. How dare you criticize a skill that defeated all of the shogun's legions? Konohate held his tongue after that, and Rokudo Sennin continued his explanation without further interruption. All of you have been chosen because you each possess a unique ability inherent in your be, he had said. You also have an awareness of your chakra, but doubtless none of you have ever tapped into it. What is this chakra you keep mentioning, Rokudo Sennin? You make it seem very volatile. Shishio asked. It is a way for me to refer to chi, or a person's life energy, that fuels a human's body and abilities, the sage answered. Once you are able to control your chakra you will be able to perform jutsu and reach your full potential. It was then Ukiguru understood the sage's initial goal. Regardless of rank in society, he'd only been searching for people who had the potential to learn the skill he was going to teach, which must mean he is able to see the chakra that he says we all have, he thought afterwards. He only chose one person from one distinct region, one person from the lands of water, lightning, stone, wind, and fire, respectively. He wanted each country to have an equal opportunity to expand on the abilities they were going to perfect. The sage explained that he could govern all of their lands at once, since he did indeed possess such power, but he did not want the burden of acting as shogun and regulating every detail of their country's functions. He still intended to perfect and preserve his own jutsu that he had created. In the meantime, everyone he had collected would stand as his vassal in their homeland and bring shinobi influence into their respective countries. They all agreed it was a fine idea. The first chapter had left Neji intrigued. He had never expected such ancient history on the origins of ninja, or what it had to do exactly with the first shinobi for any important reason. He marked his place in the book and set it aside on the table. Sleep was nearing again. Neji switched off the light, and lowered himself back down to the bed, crushing the stuffed giraffe beneath his chin. He could smell his teammates on it. Tired as he was, even he was surprised at how badly he wanted to see his team. Darkness swallowed up the room again and he closed his eyes, dreaming of the journey from the book. Later that morning as Tama left for work early, her mother inquired why she was going out so soon. She dodged her mother's questions and told her she'd be home shortly after noontime. Tama did not in fact go to work because she had off that day, not like she needs to know that. Today is a day I'll have all to myself. She stopped by Sato's apartment to check on how he was doing. It was still earlier than she'd expect him to be awake, but Tama figured it wouldn't hurt to try. She knocked twice, patiently, staring at the door while she waited in the hallway. "It's open." His shout echoed from inside. Tama let herself in and glanced around the foyer, wondering what he was up to. She set her bag down on the kitchen counter and turned the corner to his room. Unfortunately, he had left his bedroom door wide open, and she had not anticipated him to not be fully dressed either. "Kya, Sato." She turned her back to him, shutting her eyes. "Couldn't you give me some warning if you're indecent?" He frowned while he hopped around, frantically pulling his pants up. "But you've seen me loads of times. Does it really shock you anymore?" Tama faced Sato, sighing, "Just because I'm used to it doesn't mean it's acceptable." The silver-haired boy merely laughed at her, digging through his drawers for a top. He fetched a white t-shirt and yanked it over his head and then ran after her into the kitchen. "All right, I'm sorry, please don't be mad. Next time I'll say, it's open and I'm. How's that? Then you can pick whether or not you want to come in." She agreed to his weird suggestion and helped him prepare breakfast. He was a better cook than she in many respects. He had a keen sense of taste not unlike an Akamaiki's. When the meal was finished they sat down and ate together, Tama nipping politely at her food while Sato hammered down several bowls of egg and rice. "Kakashi-san asked me how you were doing yesterday," she said, approaching the subject carefully. "He said he hasn't seen you for a while." Sato raised a silver eyebrow. "I'm surprised he cares at all." "Please try to be nice," Tama admonished lightly. "Your uncle has been very troubled about all the chaos with his team. It really isn't easy to watch your students struggle." "That isn't my problem." She scowled at his cranky behavior and asked, "Are you and Kakashi-san fighting again? You know how that went last time. You can't keep acting like you're both strangers to each other. What did you say to him to get him so upset?" "We're not fighting, Tama," he said shortly, dodging the topic. "So you have been fighting." Tama confirmed it, through a precognitive wavelength. "Oh, Sato, please just let it go, whatever it is. I know it's not easy, but you've got to move on from what happened to your mother." Sato remained silent, staring down at the empty bowl in front of him. He was afraid if he said something she would detect the emotion in his voice and know just how much he was hurting inside. He always kept a smile on for her because he feared that if she knew how lonely and miserable he was she'd blame herself. She had finished eating and then stood from the table. Tama walked over to where he sat and kissed him squarely on top of his head, affectionately. "Look how Sasuke ended up because he couldn't let go of his anger. Please, Sato, open your heart again, otherwise I won't marry you." He pouted sourly at the warning. "You don't mean that." "Actually, I do." Tama laughed softly. I'll see you later and don't keep Shino-kun waiting. You still have to train with him, remember. Sato watched the door after she had closed it behind her and left the apartment. He had guessed earlier that she would have only stayed for breakfast, but he hadn't been prepared for her to address something that had been eating him up inside. She had a knack for that sort of thing. He got up from the table and began to clean up the dirty dishes, deep in thought. I guess I'll just have to go talk to Kakashi later, then. Maybe I did say some things that I shouldn't have said. Tama had left Le Chateau Sato and gone straight to one of her favored training fields. Her secret passion was still perfecting her taijutsu even when her parents insisted she work hard to find her niche in the civilian world. My niche is kicking butt, not baking pie. She had told them that on several occasions and they dismissed it. Her uncle had always found it a thoughtful or rather, youthful aphorism. Cunningly, Tama kept her parents in the dark about her training habits. They still believed she had given up being a ninja for good, when actually she still had a target set up in back of the bakery, and training weights hidden under her mattress. Oh, it's the secret life of an ex-taijutsu specialist. I should totally write an autobiography. Once on the field she realized it was already occupied. Kiba was lazing about in the grass with Akamaru curled up on his sea, almost fully recovered and enjoying the fresh air. He sat up in surprise when she had snuck out into the open. Tama felt like an intruder even though she was the one who frequented the area, a consequence of a sneaky conscience. Oh, Kiba, I'm sorry if I disturbed you. She apologized quickly, trying not to be conspicuous. I'll just go someplace else. Hey, it's fine, he replied calmly, and Akamaru leapt from his lap and out into the grass over to the black-haired girl. I just took Akamaru out to stretch his legs now that he's doing better. Tama bent down and scratched behind the dog's ears. I'm glad that he's okay now. I heard about what happened after the mission. Akamaru sat blissfully in front of her, tail wagging like mad. Kiba blinked at his Ninken's friendliness. Wow, he really likes you. It's mutual then, I guess. I love dogs. She lifted the puppy into her arms, Akamaru especially. He could already tell. Kiba watched her run around with his dog for a short while. Adoration bubbled up in his sea at the sight of how she moved, the clear sound of her voice, and onyx eyes hooded by long lashes. She was just as gorgeous as she had been at the Tanabata festival when he had seen her last. I made myself look like a total idiot then, though, Kiba thought irritably, and she's totally out of bounds because she's already engaged. My luck stinks. He blushed, acknowledging that his crush on her had not at all dissipated. Quite the contrary, it had gotten worse. His infatuation with a girl already promised to someone else would lead to big trouble, he knew, but he couldn't help himself. Kiba envied Sato bitterly, nearly to the point of revulsion. I'd treat her like a princess if she was gonna marry me. And that idiot, PFT. He talks to her like she's his babysitter. What's with that? How's that supposed to work? He was getting carried away in his contemplation. Looks like nothing can go right for me, huh? Sasuke runs off and there's nothing I can do about it. I nearly let Akamaru S on the last mission. Now the girl of my dreams is supposed to marry a lunatic. Oh yeah, I'm definitely living the good life. Hey Kiba. He looked over to her when she called. You wouldn't mind if I stayed and trained here, would you? Tama had put Akamaru down and he scampered happily back to his master. Ah, sure, go ahead. Kiba honestly had no idea that she was capable of fighting, let alone trained when she had the chance. He sat down again beside his dog in the grass, watching as Tama proceeded to beat the daylights out of a training post across the way. Haku had been discharged from the hospital later that day. Tsunade had warned him to avoid any strenuous activity or high-level jutsu for the next few days before she released him to his knucklehead friends. She had also said she'd have Jiraiya checking up on him periodically. He had only been walking down the main road beside Gaara and Naruto for a grand total of 2.5 minutes before the mentioning of Sakura and Hinata slipped from his mouth. At the subject of discussion, both of his friends promptly decided to visit their respective female interests. They abandoned Haku eagerly and dumped him off on Temari and Kankuro, who were getting used to babysitting and the such like. They sympathized with the dark-haired boy and offered to buy lunch for him. The three stragglers settled at a seafood restaurant and enjoyed sushi for lunch. In the middle of their meal they were interrupted by Genma, who had just happened past. He blinked over at Haku for a moment, scrutinizing him and then looked to Temari. Tsunade-sama wanted me to tell you that your teacher came here looking for you, he informed them, the needle in his mouth bobbing up and down as he spoke. He said that he had something important he needed to talk to you about. I'll go see what Baki's up to, then. Kankuro volunteered, and he stood from the table. Temari, you should stay with Haku. I'll come find you two later. Kankuro departed, following after Genma. Haku suspected that their sensei had only returned to advise them to go home. They'd been in leave for a long while, he knew, and Sand was probably short-handed on ninja after the invasion. Do you think you and your brother will be going back to Suna anytime soon? He asked, wanting to see what she thought. I'm not sure. Maybe. Temari admitted, frowning at the idea. Baki and Miyosuke aren't as good as the company we've found in Konoha. He smiled. I'm glad that you decided to stay. I think I am too. She agreed and smirked when she asked, so, is your Hokage upset with you after all the trouble you caused? Tsunade-sama wasn't very mad at all. Now that I think about it, Haku recalled when he had spoken to her last, she was more remorseful that we were unable to stop Sasuke. The blonde girl was quiet after that, not interested in touching on the subject of the Uchiha when she knew that he had nearly killed Haku a few days prior. The thought of it was infuriating. Haku had even shown him mercy, Gaara had told her, and that made her even angrier. They finished eating and she didn't object when Haku offered to pay for himself. Maybe some light training will do you good, Temari suggested. I've been bored out of my mind recently and it's about time we had a rematch. He paled at the proposition. Well, I suppose. He smiled after a moment. As long as you don't use your fan, I'm sure we'll be evenly matched for now. Denying her wind jutsu was not something Temari was keen on agreeing on. Then again, he could barely use any of his jutsu at the moment either, she noted. She relented and approved of his idea before striding out of the restaurant. Haku followed after her, wondering why she hadn't tried to argue for once. After some while of searching, Gaara had learned that Sakura could be found at the Hokage's tower. It was not one of the places he had first expected to find her, but he gathered that she and Tsunade had a long talk after the resulting pandemonium from their most recent mission. The redhead discovered her on the ground floor in a courtyard. Sakura stood over a table in front of a pool of fish. He lingered in the doorway, watching in curious silence. From what Gaara could see, she was struggling with a healing jutsu. Her chakra had been distributed properly, but Sakura was unsure exactly how much she really needed to help heal the carp with a wounded fin. Occasionally it would flap about on the mat laid out on the table in front of her, but she received little more indication that she had been doing anything right. He watched interestedly from his spot across the room, not wanting to disturb her from her concentration. Gaara had once seen Haku trying to use a similar healing technique during the days at the academy after reading about it in a scroll. He guessed it couldn't have been easy repairing damaged cells. Nearly a minute later, the translucent tissues on the fish's fin were schooled back together. The carp gave a sudden flap and hopped off of the table, startling Sakura. The fish landed in the pool again and settled back into its normal swimming regiment. The pink-haired girl stared at the water for a long moment in surprise before giving a small cheer. That was a lot harder than I thought it'd be. Next time I won't take it so lightly. Gaara congratulated her as he walked into the room. Well done, Sakura-chan. Sakura wheeled about to face him and greeted him with a hug. She promptly went on to explain what she had been trying to do. I was surprised that Tsunade-sama actually accepted me as her apprentice once I asked, but I'm glad. I'm going to work harder than ever to become stronger. Excellent. Gaara's pride received a generous boost after the news. She chose her learner well. Sakura had pressed her nose up against his cheek and he then thought to ask, I don't think you'd object to me stealing you from your practice now, would you? Healing fish isn't exactly entertaining, Sakura agreed, smirking mischievously. You know, I think I saw a broom closet somewhere around here before I came in. Quickly he grabbed her hand and turned around, going back in the direction of the hallway to locate the secluded area she had mentioned. Sakura laughed as Gaara tugged her along through the courtyard impatiently. Kankuro appeared in the doorway and Gaara immediately halted at the sight of him. Foiled, Gaara thought, not pleased by the bad timing of his brother's interruption. He blinked inquisitively when another sand ninja entered the courtyard behind Kankuro, vaguely recognizing him. There you are, Kankuro addressed his younger sibling. Gaara, this here is my sensei, Baki. He'd like to talk to you for a bit. Sakura gently slipped her hand away from the redheads and he grunted lowly in annoyance. She offered him a look that translated to, be courteous, now, we can fool around later. He then looked to Baki, who spoke after he believed he had Gaara's attention, we received intelligence not too long ago that you were still alive, Gaara. After Kankuro and Temari described your skill and Forud many in sand have come to feel that we can really use your help. I have my doubts that I'd be welcomed back. Gaara replied bitterly. The Kazekage was found a few weeks ago, Baki added, and Gaara watched sadness wince across his brother's face. Our village is severely weakened after Orochimaru's treachery, and we are in desperate need of dependable shinobi like you. He hadn't known that his father had been K. Not that it mattered very much to him, really. But Gaara could see that it had mattered to Kankuro. Even when he had never had a recognizable relationship with his father, at least Temari and Kankuro had. Now it was gone and Suna was straining to hold up its defenses and morale. And I am a leaf ninja, Gaara reminded himself, I am content now. I have Naruto-kun and Haku-kun and I have Sakura. What do I owe Sand? I've already spoken to Hokage-sama and she's given her consent for you to go to Suna should you decide to. Baki added, knowing the decision wasn't easy, please try to understand I wouldn't ask you this if Hidden Sand wasn't in such peril. I'm aware you are very attached to this place, but remember that you were born to Suna. The expression on Kankuro's face was a mix of tension and reluctance. Even he didn't want to ask Gaara to leave his place of refuge in Leaf, but having him back in Sand could determine the success or downfall of the village. Gaara realized that even if he had been able to overlook it for a while, he did owe something to his old village. I owe it my brother and sister. Certainly not to the people there who hated me, but I owe my allegiance to my family. I'll consider it, he told Baki. Thank you. The Junin nodded to him gratefully. Kankuro, we're going to check on Temari now. His student agreed and left to go find his sister alongside Baki. Sakura watched Gaara, her face troubled. She understood Sand's plight, but she didn't feel ready to hand him over to another village when she was so in love with him. It's all right, Gaara assured her, sensing her distress, I much prefer Leaf. It's better to give them the impression of hope than turn them down rudely. Maybe, she said quietly, still a bit nervous. The whole idea to find a broom closet had been thoroughly by then, so she turned back to the pool of injured fish and invited Gaara to stay and watch her technique. He picked a dace with Al gill from the water and put it on the table for her. Sakura went to work and Gaara observed, wondering how he'd cope without her if he did return to Suna. Just before noon Neji was discharged from the hospital and his team promptly arrived to escort him home. Lee took the liberty of transporting all of his teammates' presents, while recounting the retrieval mission to him. Tenten had to correct Lee on some of his exaggerations on the way to the compound. Neji wasn't very thrilled to hear that they had failed, but he didn't appear to be grieving over the loss of Sasuke. He was more concerned with the welfare of his friends. After they reached the Hyuga estate, Neji was greeted by his younger cousin with an overjoyed glomp. I am just so glad to see that you are all right, Neji-Nisan. Hinata had told him, beaming to see him alive and well. It was not what she had been imagining during her fight with Kabuto. Neji smiled for her, not very sure why Hinata was so overwhelmed to see him. Tenten could see his happy facial expression as clear as day, her eyes were keen to it, and her heart melted at the sight of it. Not that we need to have near-death experiences more often, but if that's what it takes to get him to smile, I'll take it. Hinata departed shortly after to go train with her father, and they continued on, stopping by Neji's room to drop off his many gifts. Lee looked around the Hyuga prodigy's plain room briefly, not surprised by its lack of color. He was impressed by Neji's not-so-well-known arsenal that was lined up on the west wall of the room. Tenten quietly admitted to Lee that she had contributed to much of it, and he almost never uses any of those weapons either. She hissed to him in outrage, he might as well just give them back. I'd rather keep them, Neji had smirked at her after overhearing her and Lee's hushed discussion. I've grown fond of them, but I don't share your tenacity for tossing precious works at foes. Tenten blinked stupidly as he walked out to the porch outside of his room. Lee snickered at her dumbfoundment, and ushered her to go outside as well. I think that Neji does not take them for granted as you do because they are harder to come by for him. Lee suggested, he admires your work more than you do. Fair. she had said, dismissing the idea. Once outside again, Lee asked Neji if he was interested in training, but Tenten was quick to shoot the idea down. Do I have to remind you that he just got out of the hospital, Lee? She pointed out stringently, let's give it a rest for now. Lee yielded and then offered to go inform Guy-sensei that Neji had safely returned home. Once he had gone, Neji gave the Kanoiki of his team a questioning look. I didn't think that I'd have to tell you this myself, but by now I am fit enough to train. I know, Tenten answered, cleverly, I only discouraged Lee so I could train with you. He smirked, you take advantage of Lee too often. I beg to differ, my friend. A garden adjacent to the porch was the designated training area for the time being. Deciding to take it easy rather than returning immediately to their normal routine, Tenten addressed teaching him the proper technique on summoning from his new scrolls. It had been a brief lesson in the academy, but she admitted she had tweaked the scrolls a bit so the seals could be used more rapidly and effectively. Neji determined it would be better to hear her out than try it himself. She had it so the scrolls were already primed to respond to him. Tenten outlined the basic artillery she had sealed into both of the scrolls, mostly shuriken and kunai because I know you keep things simple, she explained, but I did add in 3 tanto, 2 kama, 2 ebo, 2 tonfa, nunchaku, and a yari if you feel adventurous at some point. Neji's face was somewhere between amused and exasperated. I almost put in a naginator but I didn't want to start you off with something too serious, Tenten added. A weapon like that would take months for you to get used to, but a bladed polearm does have a lot of advantages with how it channels energy and all of the sweeping techniques considered. He had grown accustomed to her weapon gibberish and listened as she rambled on about how naginator was arguably one of her favorite weapons, but in my position I can't favor a weapon more than any other can I. Then I'd be a weapons specialist and not a weapons master. There's logic in that, I suppose. After a short while Tenten caught herself babbling, and noted that it was mainly because she was just so thrilled to be training again with her most treasured sparring partner. She reverted to her previous goal and proceeded to teach Neji proper summoning procedure. He learned fast, as she had expected. Tenten was surprised to see that Neji chose to use tonfa for a while and she critiqued his form occasionally. His attacks weren't as precise and rather sluggish, she found, probably due to his stiff reflexes and being hospitalized for a while. Tenten noticed Neji beginning to tire as time passed, and before long she called for them to stop. Please don't push yourself after you just finished recovering, she said worriedly, not wanting to make him feel weak. It was difficult to remind him that he wasn't at full strength without hurting his pride, which she tried to avoid doing. He relented and Tenten relaxed a little. She told him to wait a bit and that she'd return with lunch shortly. She left her own weapons out on the porch with his own and then set out, grinning to herself. He's so cooperative all of the sudden. I wonder what's up with him. After Tenten had gone, Neji went to a courtyard near the back of the compound. He intended to go back and have lunch with her when she returned, but he was curious to see Hinata train with her father. He stood near the side of the lawn and watched his uncle circle around Hinata with his Byakugan active. It was a rare sight in all respects. Hiyashi seldom ever had to use his bloodline limit against any opponent, let alone his daughter. Neji observed in fascination Hinata's own Kekkei Genkai, emitting some unusual silver glow when she moved. Hiyashi lunged forward to attack and it seemed as if he had miscalculated the distance. Hinata was nearly on the complete other side of the courtyard by the time he had turned around. She was quick, coming back at him, and she wheeled about with a motion confusing to her father's practiced eyes, and landed 2 solid, yet restrained, blows that knocked him down to the grass. Neji gawked at the sight of the leader of the Hyuga on the ground. Hinata had defeated him almost immediately, and he wasn't able to understand how she had done it. Hinata-sama has vastly improved. When did this happen? Why? Hiyashi was on his feet again and it appeared he had grown more serious. He used a powerful rotation that left a deep crater in the clearing. Hinata had evaded it and broken through his defense with rapid yuken strikes. He took a stance to use 64 palms and she had mirrored him effortlessly, attacking twice as fast with little effort, countering his assault. It ended shortly after in a stalemate and Hiyashi had told her that it was enough for the day. He looked at his daughter smugly. Tell me, Hinata, were you holding back at all? Well, she hesitated and answered softly, I was, but I didn't want you to think that. It's quite all right, you did very well. He waved off her concerns. Your ability is very interesting. Whatever it is that you are seeing, it is affecting your attack patterns, from what I can see. I will speak with the elders later and deliberate if you will be reinstated as heir. She nodded to him sadly. From his place across the way, Neji had stepped out into the open. His uncle had made it clear that her bloodline was advanced, probably beyond even his own. It was still unclear why or how the change had happened, but all Neji had to know was that it may have been a critical error to name him the heir to the clan when Hinata was clearly excelling. Hinata had seen him and the uncertainty on his face. She walked over to her cousin, feeling that she was stealing something from him that he had worked extremely hard for. She wouldn't stand for it. Hinata stood in front of Neji, and when he wouldn't say anything to her, she turned back to Hiyashi. Father, please listen to me. He gave her his attention after he had moved to leave. Neji Nisan is the rightful heir to the Hyuga clan, and it would be completely unfair to take it back. She announced boldly, not wanting her father to make any rash decisions. It's your right, Hinata-sama. Neji had said quietly, not wanting to protest. Comparing his ability to hers, he felt truly unqualified and weak. It was strange that his purpose had suddenly been jarred away from him by a strange turn in events. Hinata looked at him for a long moment and said, my aspiration is not to be the leader of the Hyuga clan, Neji Nisan. It is to protect the future Hokage and help him fulfill his dream. He was silent for a minute, thinking it over. Neji found it curious how he had immediately known that she had been referring to Naruto, even before she had said anything. If she is to lead this clan, it will strain her chances of being happy with him. I'm sure she'd rather focus her energy all on Naruto than on Hyuga affairs. I think it is a fine goal. Neji told her, smiling at the sentiment. Father, I would like it if you did not request the council to reconsider. Hinata had stated in finality, I am happy with the way things are, and I hope you are as well. Her father agreed, hesitantly, very well then, Hinata, I will see that I don't. But in respect to their curiosity, I will have them discuss your new abilities to classify them. He then looked to his nephew, you will be the leader of this clan, Neji. That responsibility is solely yours now, I hope you understand. Neji nodded, somewhat overwhelmed. It was the first time he ever actually felt the pressure of the position he was in. He could understand why Hinata was glad to be rid of the responsibility. Hinata invited Neji to lunch along with her and her father. He declined, informing them he had a previous engagement to see to. They parted ways afterwards, and Neji returned to his room, wondering how to pass the time until Tenten returned. He looked over to where Lee had dumped all of his gifts on a desk. The old book he had begun reading in the hospital peeked just over the lip of the box, and he reached for it, deciding to continue with the story. Neji settled himself out on the porch and opened it to the next chapter. Ukiguru quickly learned that he was nowhere near as naturally gifted as his peers. Fei-sun, he had seen, already possessed talent at manipulating water to her will. Both Shishio and Konohate were renowned swordsmen, and Tasaisha had already begun training under his father before they had all arrived. It seemed that the only other person who lacked previous fighting ability was Nenmaru. He had spent most of his life learning and educating others. Ukiguru was frustrated that his only skill was tilling earth. Do not fret, Ukiguru-kun. Nenmaru had told him, we are here to learn, not outdo each other. You and I are blank slates, which means there is more space in us for knowledge than our companions. Ukiguru's troubles had faded considerably after that. Over time they learned the limits of their chakra and how to perform jutsu with seals. Nenmaru translated the seals into writing after studying them, and even Rokudu Sennin was impressed when he could create a lick of fearsome flames with a stroke of his brush. Ukiguru worked hard with his friends, training his body and mind, and after mastering his chakra, he found he was able to do things that he could not have accomplished even in his dreams. Breathing fire, dancing on water, wielding wind, and jousting with lighting had quickly become a reality. After a few years training, Ukiguru's hidden talent the sage had spoken of had become clearer. How you have long worked and listened to your land, the sage had said, now the earth will obey you completely. He had spent so long tilling and farming his fields, Ukiguru had never realized how attuned to the earth he had been. Stones would tremble in his wake, and at his beckoning he could shape the ground to his liking and rearrange landscapes. He always practiced his jutsu with great discipline, as did his companions, never being boastful or proud of the gifts. Tasaisha, of all of them, had grown the most powerful. Though Okigaru and his peers praised and admired the sage's son for his skills, Tasaisha ignored their calls for friendship. He grew conceited and greedy, and over time began to question his father's teachings. Why teach so many witless commoners? Tasaisha had asked, why not bestow all of your knowledge to your own and son, and only he? He is far more worthy than some grime-covered welder. The sage disagreed completely. Hear yourself and think more clearly, Tasaisha. When knowledge is chained by constraints in it builds a dynasty, a structure that is fated to fall into ruin. Tasaisha challenged his father to a duel, and when Rokudo Senin refused him, the prince stormed from the castle in a fury, never to be seen again. Okigaru asked why he had let Tasaisha go unpunished after he had been so ungrateful and showed such disrespect. Because holding a quarrel such as that is to have a mountain tell the wind to be still, the sage had told him, neither force is able to relent, so things are best left as they are. Shortly after Tasaisha's abandonment, Okigaru and his companions had completed the sage's training. He told them to leave and return to their homes, and share their wisdom to keep the balance in their lands. You are all equals amongst each other, Rokudo Senin had told them, but know this, none of you are a match for me, your master. Should any of you grow your heads fat with sin as Tasaisha has, you will meet a swift end by my hand. They swore to him their loyalty and thanked the sage for his teachings. Okigaru said his long goodbyes to his friends, deeply hoping they would all meet again one day. The sage disappeared without another word to any of them, and they never did encounter him again. Shortly after, Fei-sun returned to her family in the realm of water, as did Konohate eagerly. Shishio went back to his castle in the realm of lightning, and the good friends Okigaru and Nenmaru parted just at the border's edge of their homelands, reluctant to leave each other's company. Nenmaru turned south after a fond farewell, and Okigaru continued north to his home in the realm of stone. It was late in the winter when he had reached familiar regions. Snow on the hills and mountainsides was beginning to melt, a harbinger of spring. All the while feasting his eyes on the grey land laid before his feet, Okigaru felt like a stranger in his old home. He was dressed richly and groomed well after having lived in the sage's castle for so long. As a result, none of his friends recognized him when he had returned to his village. He had asked for news of his father, and villagers had informed him that his honorable father had of heartbreak while he had been away. Okigaru grieved over his loss and visited his father's grave, deeply sorry for having left him so abruptly. He then had no family remaining in the world, and a great loneliness crept upon him. He was desperate to discover a greater purpose for his being in the realm of stone. He came to see how his village had grown even more poor and desolate while he had been gone. Other residents told him how they had been suffering through a 10-year drought that had the land of its fertility. Now with spring hastening, they would soon have to sow the seeds for their crops in their fields again, but they feared to invest such precious commodities to land that was frozen and tough. The soil felt cursed those days, they had said. Okigaru had heard of the desperate plight, and he decided to help revitalize the land that had been plaguing them. The next morning Okigaru went to the toughest, largest field in the village. Farmers watched him from the side of the road, bemused, wondering what it was he intended to do. All of the snow on the ground had melted, but the soil was too hard and full of stones to allow the water to permeate it. Okigaru focused his chakra and formed hand seals, getting a grip on the land, and he pulled up, seizing the hardest, most stubborn stones and held them from the ground. The surface of the soil split and cracked, and boulders from deep beneath the ground heaved upward, rolling away from the dirt it had been holding captive. The farmers gasped in shock and awe as Okigaru piled all of the intrusive rocks on the side of the field, all on his own, and then turned to the soil, churning it and turning up the nutrients that it had so long been starved of. After thoroughly tilling the field, he stopped, and the amazed farmers ran to him, cheering and praising him for such a wondrous talent. By the end of the day, all of the fields had been restored. Okigaru had explained to them all of the things the sage had taught him, and his fellow villagers were deeply grateful, glad such skills existed that had saved them from the effects of the drought. And after they had finished sowing their fields, again they became fearful. It won't be long before the raiders pass through this valley again, one of the farmers had told Okigaru despairingly. There's no way for us to fend them off if they attack again. Okigaru swore to help them. He felt a deep obligation to protect his village after he had left it and let it fall into ruin. As the apprehensive villagers had predicted, The band of thieves that periodically plundered their homes arrived a few days later. The whole group of them were armed with knives and clubs, and easily struck terror into the hearts of the townspeople. Ukiguru confronted the group of bandits bravely and said, "Leave this place now and I will stay my hand. If you continue to disrupt the lives of these people, I will show no mercy." They laughed at the man who stood alone. "Who are you to threaten us?" The leader of the thieves sneered, "You may be dressed well and look fearsome, but you are 1 against 50 strong men. Don't be a fool and let us have our way, or you will be the one begging for mercy." Yet Ukiguru would not yield, and when the leader attacked him he struck back with 10 times the force, sending him crashing back into his crowd of followers. Angrily, the thieves attacked, and Ukiguru fought furiously, using the jutsu he had learned, tearing up earth and breathing fire. Before long, the terrified bandits that remained quickly turned tail and fled for their lives. Never before had they witnessed such formidable strength. Astounded by such power, the village again came together and praised Ukiguru. They cheered happily, finally free of their worries, and asked Ukiguru if he would pass on his knowledge of ninjutsu. Ukiguru gladly promised to teach them, wanting nothing more than to help and protect the people of his village. "Hey, Neji." He looked up from his reading and saw that Tenten had returned with lunch. He put the book aside and accepted the bento she handed him gratefully. Neji briefly wondered if he should tell her about the strange story he had been following, but then decided against it when she went on complaining about how they didn't have the sesame dumplings she had wanted. "It'll have to wait for another time, then." After finishing with lunch, Hinata excused herself from her father's company. She had only caught a few brief glimpses of Naruto over the past few days, and she was curious as to where he had gone to. The Hyuga girl passed through her own small garden on the side of the estate. Hinata stopped beside the koi pond and tossed a few handfuls of feed into the water, watching the fish flap about. She hadn't been to visit her garden for a long while, and she wanted to admire the new chrysanthemums that were beginning to bloom. "I'll go find Naruto-kun in a little while." Most of the flowers were white, nestled in between burning reds from other autumnal blossoms. Hinata picked a few flowers up from the dirt by their roots, later intending to dry and press them. "Hey, those are nice." She jumped in startlement when Naruto snuck up on her from behind. Perhaps she would have noticed him if she wasn't so focused on the flowers she had been examining. Hinata held up a red flower beneath his nose, letting him have a whiff as she greeted him. "Hello, Naruto-kun. I was just thinking about going to find." "Yeah, I know, plants are distracting." He quickly understood why she hadn't met up with him sooner. "I like them a lot too, actually. I have like 6 pots on top of my refrigerator because Gaara-kun won't let me keep any more in the window. He says he has allergies, but that's a load of bull crap." The white-eyed girl laughed and brushed her knees off before standing. He accepted the red flower she had offered him, and observed it inquisitively before grinning at her. "Did you hear Haku-kun's out of the hospital now? He turned out okay, but he's still got to take it easy. Neji-Nisan is doing fine as well." Hinata informed him, gathering up all of the blooms she had picked, "though, his hair is a bit strange now." She giggled as an afterthought, "It's so short he kind of looks like me." Naruto hollered in laughter at the notion and she didn't try to quiet him. Hinata no longer cared if half of her clan knew Naruto's exact location according to his volume every time he paid a visit. It was his trademark greeting to the Hyuga compound, by that time. They calmed down shortly after, walking along the gravel path that led to the front of the estate. He gave her a sidelong glance and then halted, looking expectant. "So?" Hinata blinked over to him, puzzled. Yes, Naruto-kun. Aren't you going to say hello to me, Hinata?" Naruto asked, grinning, looking particularly fox-like for some reason. "I thought I did." She was confused, and adorably so, "Didn't I, Naruto-kun? I'm sorry if I was rude." "Hinata, it's really impossible for you to be rude, seriously." He leaned in, eyes narrowed and cerulean. "If you're happy to see me then you should let me know." His mouth brushed against her bottom lip and she stumbled backwards, startled by his forwardness. I really." Hinata realized what he was referring to and was more than happy to oblige him. "If it wasn't for her father's earlier warning, I don't think we should. I want to, but. Naruto frowned, indignant, and tried to decipher her sudden indecision. "All right. Is it because I'm offensive?" He breathed into his palm to check. I swear I brushed my teeth 4 times this morning for you. I wouldn't want to. No, it isn't that. She raised her hands to quiet him, my father. He said that my mouth is only to belong to my future husband, so, I don't think he wants me being frivolous and all that. Frivolous. Naruto was silent for a long while after that, half dreading and half rejoicing that her father was aware and had not yet hunted him down. But he totally gave me the boot by saying all that to Hinata-chan. He's right though, I'm a no-good maniac with a ton of problems. He looked over to Hinata who was staring at her feet, and she couldn't have looked any more depressed. The sight of her braced his resolution. Fine. Let him strangle me for all I care. He'll have to beat the living crap out of me before I let him tell me off. Guess what? She looked up again, trying to smile hopefully, and it only partially worked. Naruto was chuckling to himself and Hinata wondered if he was going crazy, or if they both were. If your dad told you all that and meant it, I still think we don't have anything to worry about, Naruto informed her, even if it's going to drive him bonkers. Hinata, you aren't going to be marrying anyone else. That's one thing I'm sure of. Hinata made a squeaking noise when he killed her, this time successfully, and she supposed she should have known better. Naruto wasn't one who often followed rules anyway, and she hadn't really expected him to. She didn't close her eyes because she wanted to see him. She wanted to see him and be sure that he was really there. Hinata admitted she probably could have watched him even with her eyes closed, with her amplified blood limit, but she wasn't sure if he'd appreciate her face bristling with veins at the moment. She left her eyes half-lidded, watching his sharp, whisked face and how his hair was golden with the afternoon light illuminating it. Enjoying the view? He asked after a moment, noticing she was distracted. I'm kind of doing all the work here. Come on Hinata, you were a bit more lively back when Hinata responded, shutting him up, and accidentally nipped his lip. He didn't mind though. A reaction was a reaction, and she was utterly glorious no matter what she did. After thoroughly killing each other in the middle of the path, the two huddled up in a close embrace, muttering nonsensical, affectionate things. Hinata hoped that the person who just crossed the trail up ahead was not one of her cousins, and if so, that they hadn't noticed her kill a certain blonde boy who most Hyuga had come to label the crazy loudmouth. It appeared they were undiscovered, so she relaxed, and Naruto was content sniffing her hair, fascinated by her unique scent and the indigo sheen he so often overlooked. She seemed to fit into the line of his body perfectly, splendidly, and he believed he could stand there for the rest of forever if he had the time and inclination, but she would get terribly bored of it after long, he suspected. Those flowers you've got with you, he said after a while, and she could feel him speak against her cheek, are you going to dry 'em out? I'll help you if you want. Well, most boys don't like that sort of thing, I thought. I'm not most boys. I'm Naruto. I'm going to be Hokage. And I'm yours. The blonde nin declared, if I want to press flowers with my favorite girl, then I'm gonna press flowers. And everyone else can shove it. Right. She nodded, approvingly, and let him hold her free hand as he tugged her along the path again, though, you wouldn't rather spend time with Haku-kun. I live with him. And mostly when we spend time we're training, studying, or washing dishes. Naruto replied shortly, I don't rather that sort of thing Hinata. I'll buy Haku-kun ramen later or something, and I totally don't regret coming to see you. They turned left, off of the path, and onto the front lawn of the mansion. Jiraiya had found them while they had still been holding hands, and he smiled to himself for a minute. Ah, cute. When they're older they might just be the stars of my new book, but right now I'm going to have to break up this innocent liaison. The toad sage cleared his tea and Naruto sighed, recognizing the noise. He turned around to face his perverted teacher and Hinata did the same, but with far less disdain. Sorry to interrupt things, Hinata-sama, but Naruto and I need to have a little chat. Jiraiya said smugly, you wouldn't mind if I borrowed him for a bit, would you princess? She shook her head politely and Naruto had half wished she was less cooperative and had sent the hermit packing. He decided to be pleasant, though, since it had been a good day. Hinata squeezed his hand goodbye before he followed after Jiraiya and then turned to the compound, intending to set some of the flowers in the time until he returned. They stopped near the entrance to the grounds and Jiraiya looked down at Naruto, noting the annoyed look on his face. Before his blonde pupil could begin complaining, Jiraiya began, so here's the deal, squirt, As of late I've been gathering information on the Akatsuki. Since they won't be planning their next strike for another 2 years or so, I've decided I'm going to train you outside of the village during that time. That sounds pretty cool, actually. Naruto admitted, then asked, Haku-kun and Gaara-kun are coming too, right? His sensei shook his head in the negative. I can't risk it, Naruto. Haku is in no condition to leave the village, especially when Orochimaru is still keeping a sharp eye for any sign of him. And bringing the Sand Kid would be the worst mistake I could make. You and Gaara together at the same time would be the ideal opportunity for the Akatsuki to pick you off. It was true. It was more dangerous to have his friends with him than without him, at the moment. That didn't mean Naruto liked it, though. He wished there was some way they could sneak out and train abroad, but they wouldn't be a very difficult bunch to find. I understand, Naruto said mechanically. He hated the idea of being without his best friends, but he refused to pass up the chance for more intense training. I'm sorry about this, kid. Jiraiya apologized. His voice was sincere. You know, I wish things were different too. We just got dealt a crappy hand is all, and we've got to play it safe for now and work with what we have. I'd bring 'em too if things weren't this way. Naruto was frowning. I know. It sucks. But hey, when do we have to get going? Did you say, Ero-sensei? Tsunade said we could leave immediately, come to think of it. Jiraiya scratched his chin. It'd be better to go sooner versus later. Time's not exactly on our side. The blonde boy was alarmed at the news. Immediately. That's not cool. We all just got settled down and now I have to leave. What about Haku-kun and Gaara-kun? What about Hinata-chan? He wasn't at all prepared. He was happy and he was beginning to see just how comfortable his life in Leaf had become. Okay. Well, could you give it 3 days then? Naruto asked, hoping for an adjustment period. That way I could get ready and say goodbye to everyone. Jiraiya raised an eyebrow. I won't argue with that. I wasn't exactly planning on leaving today either. That's too abrupt for an old fart like me. You get situated and hang around with your princess today. I'm off to go check up on Haku. The Toad Sage departed to find his recovering pupil and Naruto re-entered the Hyuga estate. All that he and his teacher had discussed weighed heavy on his heart. This is going to be really tough. I don't know if I'm ready, but if I've got to get going, I guess now's as good a time as any. He navigated his way to where Hinata's room was located and leapt up and into the open window. She didn't jump in surprise when he appeared. She had already spread out a number of thick books that she intended to flatten the flowers with. Naruto walked over to the middle of the room and sat directly across from her, reaching for a white chrysanthemum. What did Gama-senin want to talk with you about? Hinata asked curiously, handing him a book to use. Naruto laid the bloom flat between 2 pages and then closed the book, clamping down on the fresh flower carefully. He put it aside and looked over to her. Nothing important. Don't worry about it, Hinata-chan. I'll tell you later. The following day, all of the genin teams in Konoha had re-established the normal routines. They reunited to train and take missions as they usually did, still slightly disquiet after Sasuke's flight from the village. Team 2 was no exception. Naruto, Gaara and Haku ventured to their training area in the forest. They didn't begin to spar straight away, however, because Gaara had been telling him about how he had been approached to go to Suna. The subject had been prompted after Naruto had explained how he'd be leaving with Jiraiya soon and they were all a bit nervous about it. Right now Temari and Kankuro are with Sakura-chan's team, Gaara added, leaning against a training post. They're attempting to soothe the tension there, but I'm not sure if it'll do any good. Yeah, Naruto agreed gloomily. I really don't think any of them will ever get used to Sasuke being gone. When he had said the Uchiha's name, he was surprised by how calm he was. After seeing that Haku had survived, Naruto was far less vengeful towards Sasuke than he had thought he'd be. All the same, I'm going to kick his ass so hard, he'll be wishing he never left in the first place. I have a suggestion. Haku spoke up after having been deep in thought. Naruto-kun, if you are going to be gone for however long, Jiraiya-sensei said, I think we should all exchange jutsu before going separate ways. Both Naruto and Gaara's eyes lit up at the idea. Awesome. The blonde cried excitedly, we'll teach 1 jutsu each, how about it? Are either of you interested in shadow clones? Indeed they were. Both of his teammates listened carefully to his instruction when he explained the fundamentals and details of the technique, since Naruto was clearly an old pro. He showed them the hand sign, and warned them that it'd be better if they didn't try to experiment with detonating clones, even I'm not that great at it and it's dangerous as hell. They learned the jutsu quickly, but by no means did that mean they had mastered it, Naruto reminded them. Until they could practically create Kage Bunshin by blinking, and had fully integrated them into their fighting style, Naruto said he'd never be convinced that they were truly adept with the jutsu. Gaara and Haku agreed with the notion, but the redhead went on and created 10 clones to show off, while Haku only had the capacity for 3. Naruto told him to quit it. My technique will require a specific location, Haku had said, and they migrated to the waterfall nearby the Hokage Monument. He intended to trade them Water Dragon Blast, and both Gaara and Naruto doubted it would be a jutsu that would come easily to them. The number of seals were more than what Naruto had the patience to learn, but he submitted himself to Haku's instruction and observed the jutsu in action. Both Jinchuriki noted it was more useful to Haku than it would be to them, because their friend had the ability to fully control and recycle water. We only get one shot with this jutsu, Naruto thought irritably. They came to respect the brute force and power of the attack, and Gaara was flabbergasted when Naruto had accomplished a perfect strike sooner than he had. Haku had reasoned that Naruto's chakra control was most likely more precise than Gaara's, and of course Gaara grew agitated. A short while later the red-haired boy had also learned the water jutsu, and he and Naruto spent a long while recklessly attacking each other with blasts of water, trying to outdo the other. Haku could only watch their antics in amusement. After being thoroughly drenched, they returned to their training area and took a break to dry off. While they waited, Naruto looked to Gaara, befuddled. I'm wondering, Gaara, what jutsu do you plan on trading? It's not like we're any good with sand or stuff like that. Haku also found it a valid point. Gaara stood up, deciding to proceed even if his shirt hadn't finished drying. I did have to think about it, he admitted, then smirked. I figured neither of you would have a very hard time learning a fire jutsu. His friends balked at the statement. He's totally bluffing, Naruto thought to himself, unable to believe it. How the hell would he? The honest words had gone from Gaara's mouth to God's ears, and sure enough, he breathed a huge fireball in the center of the field that left his friend speechless. It's supplementary and easy for a leaf shinobi to master, Gaara shrugged. Sorry, I couldn't offer anything of a higher level. It was that or sand burial. It will suffice. Haku smiled pleasantly. He and Naruto quickly learned the grand fireball technique, and Naruto began to suspect that Gaara had learned the jutsu from Sakura. It makes sense, really. He's been spending so much time with her, of course she's gonna teach him some of her jutsu. He could relate the situation to when Hinata had given him a crash course in Yuken. After inquiring about the origins of the fire jutsu, Gaara admitted he had been training with Sakura in her free time. Most times soon it would shoo him away from the tower so he would stop distracting her pupil from her studies. When he became more persistent, she would attack him with volleyballs projected at him at speeds reaching 185 miles per hour or more. She hit me once too. Gaara added, without my sand shield she may have unintentionally K me. Bar-chan's good at K people unintentionally, so watch yourself. Naruto agreed, nodding with squinted eyes. After fooling around with the 2 new jutsu they each acquired, the boys of Team 2 returned home for lunch. Naruto went to work preparing ramen and Gaara dropped onto the couch lazily, ready for a nap. Haku had changed shirts, since his GI had gotten singed after Naruto had nearly missed him with a fireball. He found the black shirt he had switched into was in fact Gaara's, but he didn't feel guilty. He and his teammates often shared their clothing, with the exception of their everyday outfits. I just couldn't see myself in Naruto-kun's attire, it just screams attack me. He passed through the living area unnoticed, and gave one last look to his distracted friends before silently slipping out the door. A few minutes later Naruto glanced over to Gaara on the couch, puzzled, and then turned back to the boiling water while he asked, is it just me? Or did Haku-kun totally sneak off just now? The red-haired boy opened one eye, drowsily. He's good at that. This must be the first time you've ever noticed. Well, sheesh. He's like a ghost sometimes. Naruto barked back in annoyance. I guess he doesn't want to stay for ramen. Where do you suppose he's off to? Wherever he doesn't want us to follow. Gaara droned, sleepy and yet still able to recite a dictum, and since he won't be joining us I call dibs on his share. No way you lazy piece of s. I made it so I should get it. Naruto retorted, grabbing the cup of noodles that had been set aside for Haku, make your own damn ramen for once. Gaara said nothing and rolled over, stretching out onto the full length of the sofa. Naruto had won that round lock, stock, and barrel. He doubted he'd ever take the responsibility to make his own food, or leave the comfortable sansi of his couch. While he drifted off to sleep for an afternoon nap, Naruto took advantage of his state and ate all 3 cup noodles on his own. Haku ended up on a training field that Team 7 had been using. Kakashi was not supervising his students, but Sakura had invited Temari and Kankuro along to help her and Kiba train. Temari's wind jutsu kept the both of them on their toes, while Kankuro refrained from using his puppets against the Leaf Ninja. After a short while Temari excused herself for a break on the side of the field, and watched in amusement as Kiba dove and dodged to avoid incoming fireballs from the pink-haired girl, and now that the Hokage is training her she'll be a tough opponent for the dog kid. The Sand Kanoiki was beginning to like Sakura and her spirited personality. She could actually picture herself a sister-in-law with pink hair in the future, though I don't want to think about any nieces or nephews I might have then. What do you think of Sakura-chan's team? Haku had asked and Temari faced him after noticing he had snuck up on her. He was wearing black, a hue that made him look lean and more boyish. Naive, for the most part. Sakura is pleasant company though, and the Kiba fellow keeps challenging Kankuro to fight, which is absurd. She replied, still believing she and her brother had more skill than the Leaf Genin. Looks like their teacher finally decided to show up. Kakashi appeared with a small wave and both of his pupils stormed up to him, demanding to know why he had shown up 3 hours late. This is what it's like normally with Team 7. Haku assured her. Strange. Temari droned, I think they're better off now than they were when the Uchiha was with their team. He probably wasn't much of a cheerful face while he was with them. Please don't say that. She looked to the dark-haired boy, who had a tense expression after listening to her harsh words. Temari decided to drop the subject even though she had just as much dislike for Sasuke as her brother did. It was clear it was something that Haku was sensitive about, especially when he still felt responsible for the failure of the retrieval mission. Gaara-kun told me about his invitation to Sand. Haku said thoughtfully after a moment, I think it would do him some good if he spent some time there. He might find he favors his natural environment. I doubt that, she said quietly, and he gave her an inquiring look so she continued, even if he's with us it may bring up some painful memories for him if he goes back. And now that my father is the village is hectic. It won't be one of the most welcoming places for him presently. I'm sorry about your father. Haku mewed guiltily, unaware the Kazekage had been unaware Gaara's father had been Temari was silent for a long while and they watched Kankuro take on both Sakura and Kiba across the way. Kakashi sat reading his book on a tree stump as his students tousled with the Sand Ninja. Don't be sorry. He didn't mean that much to me anyway. Now that he's gone it's just me and my brothers from here out, I guess I prefer it that way. She wiped at her eyes, frustrated, did you know I was actually considering staying in Leaf? Then Baki shows up and tells Kankuro and I that we've been promoted to Chunin, and that we're needed back home to help out. Haku felt unsettled at the sight of her so troubled. He understood. She wanted to be with her siblings in a place where they could all be content, but duty came before leisure. Now she was a Chunin and she was being summoned back to Suna. Being taken away from a place she had grown fond of. Only do what your heart tells you to. Haku recommended softly. Our hearts have been telling us to stay with Gaara, Temari said lowly, but how am I supposed to know for sure if he wants to go to Sand with us? I don't think he'd leave his friends. She turned away from him, refusing to let him see her distraught like she was. They were being torn again just like they had been when they were children, Temari felt. She saw little hope of her family ever being fully reunited again. Don't be upset, Temari. Haku's voice sounded hopeful, I think Gaara-kun will go with you if you ask him to. But I won't ask him to. He'd BS everything he has here if he went with us. She protested sullenly, I couldn't do that, ask him to give it all up. She cares much more than she'll let others believe. Haku thought, keen to see through her facade, Temari will hide her compassion beneath the tough exterior she created. It's a way to protect herself. In that respect, she is just like Gaara-kun. It made sense they would behave in similar ways, he guessed. They had both suffered when they were young, and had to deal with the callous principles in Suna. They found ways to shield themselves from being hurt again. Temari had calmed herself considerably, but she didn't appreciate how Haku stood in front of her, eyeing her inquisitively. He didn't look like he was going to exploit her moment of vulnerability, but she didn't know him well enough to trust him. He probably thinks I'm a nervous wreck. Maybe that's accurate, but I sure as hell am not going to take any S from this doe-eyed little. If you won't, then I will ask Gaara-kun to go with you. Haku decided, smiling considerately, and if he's hesitant about leaving, then I will go too. That way it won't be as uncomfortable for him as you make it sound. Temari hadn't been expecting him to relieve the pressure. She'd anticipated him to selfishly insist that Gaara remain in Leaf, but he had not. In fact, he had volunteered to join him if there had been any reluctance. Her opinion of him changed drastically. She could understand why Gaara held him in such high esteem. You'd actually go? She asked, surprised. You realize we live in the desert, right? Are you sure you could put up with that? He was empathetic to the point where he disregarded his own needs. At the time, she did not know it. Don't worry about me, Haku answered smoothly. You know Gaara-kun would never allow you to be unhappy, and neither will I. Temari accepted the idea after the reassurance, but blinked in confusion when she felt a gentle sensation capture her mouth. It was a very brief K, but she swore it left an electrical charge of some sort on her lips. It was so interesting and new it was scary, and Temari leapt back, completely bewildered. What the hell is your problem? Haku stood there demurely, hurt by her defensiveness. There isn't a problem, Temari. At least he hoped there wasn't. Even he was unsure why he had acted the way he had. She was beautiful and troubled, and he felt compelled to do something about it. So he did what came naturally to him and showed affection. Haku had forgotten it was something Temari was in a constant feud with. When you act like a dunderhead, I'd call it a problem. Temari announced, hissing, grateful no one across the clearing had seen the curious exchange from a moment ago. She was unsure what all of it meant, for both her and her admirer. I'm sorry if I upset you, but I can't change how I feel. Haku said quietly. You can't change how you. No. It clicked in her head then, and she quickly rejected the thought of getting involved with her brother's friend. Does it even matter to you what Gaara thinks about this? Of course it does. That didn't help. Clearly he wasn't in touch with the reality that there were certain courtship rules, and that friends don't go for friends' older sisters if they're smart. Haku watched her, eyes stormy and brilliant, and she feared she wouldn't be able to convey to him how he may have been misguided in his emotions. You're just being a ridiculous, pubescent, hormonally driven kid who needs a reality check. Temari tried to explain the incident through logic. Whatever you think you feel about me is an illusion. I'm quite sure it isn't. He replied smilingly, with the imperviousness of a brick wall. It was the same innocent, cordial face she had first seen during the final rounds. Haku was deceptively heedless and sweet, and Temari felt her resolve quake at the inviting sight of an expression that practically screamed opportunity. The electric feeling on her mouth still resonated, and she wondered how he had done it. You better stop acting so goddamn cute all the time. She concluded loudly, and then stormed off across the field back to Team 7, hoping he wouldn't follow. Haku could see that she was flustered and had thoroughly turned him down. He inwardly admitted he hadn't expected her to allow his advances, but he didn't see himself giving up just then. She hadn't turned him down flatly. Temari had actually had a hard time telling him off, which was rarer for an aficionado of rudeness. She may be as terribly stubborn as Gaara, but she must have a warm heart just as he does. He was actually quite sure she was accepting, even when she so fiercely denied it. Haku wisely chose to leave the training area and let her be, knowing there would be other times to try and appeal to her. Temari leaned on her fan, distracted, staring at the ground in bafflement after she had rejoined Sakura. Kankuro looked to his sister, smirking, "What's up with you? Your face is all red." Sakura and Kiba observed as well and agreed, none of them the wiser that Haku had paid a very short, very interesting visit. Temari barked at them to mind their own business, and opened her fan, knocking her pestering brother into a bush with a gust of wind. Little did she know that Kakashi had been witness to the events that had occurred across the field. He kept his eyes glued to the page, not wanting to get involved. Kids these days, they're all work and no fun. Later that day, Hinata stopped by the Hokage's tower after being summoned. She entered Tsunade's office after knocking politely and was quickly let inside. Well done, Hinata. I want to commend you on your defeat of Yakushi Kabuto during the retrieval mission. Tsunade was smiling broadly. Naruto told me all about it. You've done a great service by dispatching one of the high-ranked enemies of Leaf listed in the bingo book. I did what I had to, Hokage-sama. Hinata answered modestly. Your father has also been bragging about your new ability to all of the clan leaders in the village, it seems, the Hokage added, smirking when Hinata's face turned scarlet. He's very proud of you. Since you've proven to be so dependable, I've decided to assign you to a mission I have on hand. A mission? Right now? She was startled. What about You won't need your teammates for this. It's simple. She gestured over to another Hyuga who stood quietly on the right side of the room. Since young Fujita here has just been promoted to Genin rank, it wouldn't be wise to send him out of the village on his own with the threat of sound so great. Her cousin gave her a small, timid wave hello and she smiled at him in greeting. She hadn't known he'd graduated, since it was said the most recent graduating class hadn't produced any capable ninja. It appeared he was the only exception. Does he have any teammates, I wonder? Is he being trained privately? She decided to ask later. I want you to go with Fujita to the village hidden in the grass to meet with his sensei, Nitobe Sawako. He is there gathering herbs vital to medicines we would like to produce here in Konoha, and at last grass is cooperating. Tsunade sounded very pleased, as if she had something to do with the change. Go there and help him bring the supplies home. Of course, Tsunade-sama. Hinata accepted the mission. How long do you think this will take? No more than 2 days, I should think. The Hokage estimated, if you leave now, no more than a day, maybe. It depends on Fujita. He hasn't traveled long distances at great speed like you have. This is his first time. The young boy looked embarrassed by his lack of experience, but that wasn't what Hinata was concerned about. 2 days. But Naruto-kun will be leaving soon. We'll have to go quickly or I won't be back in time to see him. I expect you to take this seriously, Hinata, even if it is only C rank, Tsunade added, seeing the girl's distraction. You are responsible for Fujita as the leader of this team. Now get going, so you can cover some distance before nightfall. They bowed to the Hokage and then left the office together. On the way out of the tower, Fujita looked to Hinata. Hinata-sama, I really want to thank you for saving my life during the invasion. I thought that I was going to rest that day, and my brother had done everything he could to try and save me. He said you are a great blessing to our clan. It really was the least I could do, Fujita-kun. Hinata assured him, smiling happily, and I'm sure you will be just as great a shinobi as your big brother. Once they returned to the compound, they parted ways temporarily to pack their belongings. Hinata packed feverishly, trying not to forget anything as she scrambled about her room preparing. Oh, I do hope we return in time. What would I do if I came home and Naruto-kun was gone? Hinata went out to the front of the estate to wait for Fujita. She looked off to her right, and blinked in surprise to see Neji reading quietly on the porch. She approached him and he looked up from his book. Hello, Hinata-sama. Hinata summed up the goal of her mission, and by the time she had finished, Fujita had come back. The both of you be careful, then. Neji wished them luck, ignoring how Fujita gawked at his suddenly short hair. He watched as Hinata seemed to run frantically out through the front gate of the compound, with Fujita scrambling to keep up with her. She certainly is in a big hurry. By nightfall, both Temari and Kankuro had bid the younger brother good night, and then returned to the apartment they had resided in during their stay in Konoha. Kankuro had fallen asleep immediately, if his loud snoring from across the room hadn't been indication enough for Temari. She remained awake, restless from her little encounter with Haku. Her brother's snores weren't exactly helping her rest easy either. He's totally crazy, that kid. She decided, and she had previous evidence that supported her conclusion. He often put himself in dangerous situations, acted rashly on missions, and never, ever put himself before others. In a way, Temari guessed those were a few of the reasons why he had such a strong bond with Gaara. He had surprised her, though she supposed she probably shouldn't have been. They had been spending an increasing amount of time together and Haku always had possessed a strange charm. She hadn't realized what it had meant until he had to spell it out for her. He's too nice. It's almost like it's a phony act, except that it's not. It's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. Temari didn't know how to cope with his gentleness. Haku was too docile and sweet, and she had never encountered such qualities in a person before. The way she viewed it was that her environment was partially to blame for her defensiveness. No one was nice in Suna. Life was hard there, continually dependent on support from outside the village for food and resources, and many times they had gone without necessities for periods of time when no one would lend aid. The struggling in her village made most shinobi hard-nosed and distrustful. There, kindness was always considered the same as weakness and it was unacceptable. Haku displayed selflessness that she was unacquainted with and she hadn't known how to react to him. One of the last things people in Suna were concerned with was love and friendship, both things Haku had in spades. Though he was far from weak, she acknowledged. Temari rolled over and gazed out the window. Trees creaked in the breeze outside and it was a sight she was getting used to. No matter how different leaf was from sand, she was beginning to grow very fond of it. The same could be said for her situation with the dark-haired boy. I like him too, she admitted, grudgingly, but where would that put me in standings with Gaara? Am I going crazy? Stuff like this shouldn't happen in the first place, but Haku sure isn't trying to fix it. He says he cares about how Gaara would feel, but he acts like it's no big deal if he finds out. She doubted her youngest sibling would take kindly to his friend after hearing his intentions. He certainly hadn't during the time frame between the preliminary and final matches of the Chunin exam. They had gotten into a fight then, and she didn't want to be responsible for another calamity. It doesn't seem as likely, though. Temari noted, pulling the sheets up beneath her chin. Things are resolved between them and Gaara isn't as hostile towards him after he landed in the hospital. Maybe it would work. She paused, frowning inwardly. That's a big maybe, actually. After a moment she smiled to herself. Temari was familiar with taking risks and she figured things couldn't go too badly if she gave the kid a shot. He's not a bad K, that's for sure. I swear it still feels tingly. She brushed her fingers over her lips at the thought. If he impresses me'll let up. It's about time I got an admirer anyway and he is a piece of eye candy. She didn't want to think any more after that and she rolled over, closing her eyes and welcoming sleep. Perhaps Haku would prove to be worth all the trouble he was about to cause. Temari wasn't about to stop him. At long last he felt purpose again and it wasn't long before he began training 3 students of his own the disciplines of ninjutsu. He made each of them promise to only use the skills they learned to protect their village and loved ones. Ukiguru was a patient, stern teacher and his disciples had come to adore him and his wisdom. They obeyed him without question and under Ukiguru's leadership the small village prospered. One day he had left his students to train on their own and look after the village, and he took a long, quiet walk along the mountainside. The trees were coming back to life as spring blinked her sleepy eyes upon the land. Ukiguru marveled at his beautiful home, and looked up to where a castle had been built on the slopes of the valley. It was the home of the daimyo who owned the lands in the stone country. Ukiguru himself had heard very little about the newly instated lord and few people had ever seen him outside of his mansion. He went closer, just outside the castle, and peered up into a high window where a face had come into view. A beautiful young woman sat beside the window, gazing out into the distance. Despite her lovely face she looked terribly lonely, and Ukiguru felt his heart swell at the sight. He decided to go and speak to her. Using his chakra, Ukiguru leapt up onto the monstrous wall surrounding the palace and scaled it. The young lady was shocked to see someone had climbed the impassable wall her father had built, and she backed away in fright when Ukiguru entered through the window. Please don't be afraid, he said softly. My name is Ukiguru and I saw you staring out from your window there. I only want to speak with you. The woman relaxed, seeing his sincere disposition, and said, I see. Well, Ukiguru, never have I seen a man scale such an immense wall before. You are very gifted. My name is Maima and I am the princess of the land of stone. He was very pleased to meet her indeed. Ukiguru was curious to know why she allowed all of the villages of the land to suffer through such hardships. A good leader seeks to help those he or she governs, he had told her. Meima admitted that she truly wanted to improve the conditions the people lived in, but there was no way she could persuade her father to do so. He is a stubborn man, Meima had said, and a man who can avert the truth from his ears. Ukiguru explained how he was training the people in his village as ninja, and that if the daimyo lent them aid, he would benefit from their skill and protection in times of peril. Meima found the idea sensible and agreed to help him reason with her father. They went to his chambers and tried to negotiate with him, but the Lord Tokito was adverse to Ukiguru's suggestion. Those fools are of little use to me as it is. The daimyo had said, teach them to fight if you like, but my army will always be greater. He would hear no more from Ukiguru after that and sent him away, not caring about the toils the village faced. Do not fret, I believe you can disprove my father if you do your best, Meima had told him as he went to leave, and please return soon, Ukiguru-san. My father doesn't allow me many visitors and I enjoy your company. He agreed that he would before he left. When Ukiguru returned to his village he shared with the townspeople his idea of earning the daimyo's cooperation. They admitted it would be difficult, but many said that they would be more than happy to begin learning ninjutsu. On days Ukiguru was not busy training and advising his students, he would travel up the mountainside and scale the castle wall to speak to Meima. He visited her often and they spoke discussing the progress of the village's training. Ukiguru also told her stories of the time he had spent training with Rokudo Sennin and his friends. Meima was quite fascinated by his adventures and shared with him stories of her own life. He came in secret to see her, knowing her father would not be pleased to see him slinking about the palace again. Weeks passed and with the full arrival of spring the farmer's seeds began to take root and grow in the new, blessed soil. It was that time Ukiguru often spent laughing with Meima and walking through her gardens with her. One morning Ukiguru came to her window, bringing flowers with him, and said, "Come run away with me, Meima, if your father irks you so. Come live with me in my village and I will show you only love and joy. Though I have little to offer I could be a good husband for you." She accepted the flowers from him and kissed his cheek. "There could never be a better husband for me than you, my love. Though my heart sings at the thought of escaping this place and living with you, I'm afraid I cannot go anywhere without my father's approval." Ukiguru was troubled, knowing the daimyo was very arrogant, but went to him the same day, courageously, and asked for his daughter's hand in marriage. Tokito laughed in response, "Don't be a fool. You could never be worthy enough for my lovely daughter. Now leave this place at once." He sent Ukiguru away again and he did not see Meima again for some time. While he had been reading, Neji shifted in his position on the bed. A piece of paper slipped from between two pages he had turned to and landed in his lap. He put the book aside and sat up straighter, curious about the old, yellowing slip of parchment he had discovered. There was writing on it, neat and formal, and he recognized that it was certainly not Tenten's writing. He wondered if she had ever even examined the book she had owned before giving it to him. Neji read the sprawling note on the paper in the flickering rays of light from the lantern. It's addressed to Tenten. He hadn't expected to find a message for his teammate, nor did he know who had written it. The note was small and looked as if it had been penned down in a rush. "I don't know how old you are now that you're reading this, but I suppose now it means that I'm gone. I had hoped I would be around long enough to tell you these things myself, but your mother and I face peril every day, as you already know." Neji assumed her father had something to tell her before and never got the chance to say it. "I want you to know that we love you and think of you always. Every mission we take is only for you and the good of the village. I want you to know that even if they found us, if they are the reason I'm not with you today, that they will not be able to find you. You will be safe. And if you ever feel like you need extra training, go speak with Hayate-kun, and keep the forge orderly, please, I know you know how to manage it. But Tenten, remember, if something goes wrong, if they do find you, you must resist with all your might. What they want is what you already have. I've left it for you in the black scroll. It's yours. Please keep it secret. I love you and I trust you. Please don't forget us once you're a legendary Kunoichi. Papa." Below that was written hurriedly. "Be careful with this book. We took it with us when we came to Konoha. It's my favorite and it's irreplaceable." Neji sat staring at the paper, stunned. He couldn't believe Tenten had never found her father's last wish, and something in his gut warned him it was important that she read it herself to understand its meaning. He replaced the slip back between the pages it had fallen out of and left the book on his desk. He dimmed the lantern light before retiring to sleep. Neji wondered what on earth Tenten's father had meant by them being responsible for his absence, and why she had to be wary of them. The next morning Naruto woke with the first light of dawn. He rolled out of bed, yawning contentedly as he strolled about his room with zombie reflexes, and selected clothing for the day. He would have worn his normal outfit had his neon orange jacket not gone suspiciously missing. I bet Haku-kun hid it. He hates that thing and says it's a beacon to enemies, he just has no fashion sense. As retribution, he stole one of Haku's fishnet shirts and claimed it for himself. After dressing, Naruto ventured to Gaara's room, entering with a loud bang. His red-haired friend did not stir even with all the clamor he was made, so Naruto took the more direct approach and leapt onto the bed, jumping, attacking, and talking Gaara back to consciousness. Leave. Gaara grumbled, half irritable, half asleep. Where did Haku-kun go off to, I wonder? Was Naruto's response to his friend's sleepy demand. Don't know. Now leave. Or, come on, Gaara-kun. You better wake up because you're missing out on your precious time with Sakura-chan. Naruto chided mischievously, still perched above Gaara's head. She's training with Tsunade-sama right now. He retorted blearily, desperately wishing for sleep. I'll take her out to lunch later or something. Now get out. The blonde boy didn't take Gaara seriously, not when he wasn't entirely conscious, and that means he isn't dangerous yet. Provided that Shukaku is dormant right now. You're a terrible boyfriend, Gaara. Get a move on. Gaara told him to eat s. Naruto laughed, giving up and hopping out of the room. I'm going to look for Hinata-chan, so I'll see you later. He called over his shoulder, his loud, obnoxious cry echoing in Gaara's ears. Even after his friend had left, he still could not get any sleep, so he grudgingly threw his blanket aside and proceeded to go shower. He'd go see Sakura anyway, even if it meant the goddamn violently chasing him off again. Gaara wouldn't stand for Naruto calling him a terrible boyfriend while he was clearly the incompetent one. After washing up he got dressed, and it was then Gaara did grow curious of where Haku had gone off to. It was in his nature to inform them of his future whereabouts, but recently Haku had been a bit sparing on telling them where he'd be. Sneaky. Gaara first thought. He wondered if he was stealing ninjutsu scrolls again, or if he had picked up another improper habit. In due course he resolved to locate his shifty teammate before going to visit Sakura. He found Kankuro first, inadvertently. Gaara bumped into his brother after heading down the main road. He asked if he had seen Haku anywhere and was answered in the negative. Kankuro also looked perplexed. Actually, I was going to ask you if you happened to see where Temari went. Suspicious. He found that their corresponding disappearances could not simply be a coincidence. Gaara recruited the help of his older brother to locate the two missing shinobi, and they went about searching the village. About a half hour later, they did in fact find both Temari and Haku. They had been sparring together at Team 2's training area. Kankuro dismissed the previous anxiety, glad to see they were finally being friendly with each other. He trained with his younger, slightly distracted brother. Gaara counted Kankuro's puppets with his sand, all the while keeping an eye on Haku across the way. He could see his friend was using shadow clones against Temari, trying to become familiar with the new jutsu he had acquired. Temari are an incoming fireball with a fierce wind generated by her fan. Time passed and both his sister and the dark-haired boy continued to exchange savage blows without even hurting the other. Their strange interactions had sidetracked both Gaara and his brother, and they stopped in their scuffling to watch the two fight on the opposite side of the field. Just what the heck is going on? Kankuro thought to himself. Yesterday Temari was acting really weird during training and now she's he didn't know what to label it. He had never seen his older sister smile good-naturedly during a fight. It was beyond all classification. Gaara had known something was off from the start, and watched with his arms folded, supposing Haku was yet again responsible for an incident. Temari didn't appreciate how both of her siblings were brazenly glaring at her and her sparring partner. It's understandable, I guess. But they don't trust anything. They're just going to have to cope. And only with the intention of confounding her younger brothers, Temari grabbed Haku by his arm while he had been tying his hair back and boldly K the startled boy full on the mouth. Kankuro and Gaara watched the exchange from their place across the field, shocked. A shattering of comprehension seemed to create a fracture in their brains, and all logical thought was obliterated. She did not just, she did. Does that answer your question? She asked them, smirking devilishly. She received no response and Temari hummed triumphantly, having gotten the reaction she'd been looking for. Haku, at that time an innocent victim, stood dazed beside her and obeyed when she told him they were leaving. Once they had departed, Kankuro, very slowly and hesitantly, glanced over to his brother. Gaara's eyes had not moved from where they had been focused and he hadn't blinked either in that time. Utter bafflement had taken over, and Kankuro had a moment to fear for his safety while he was still unsure if Gaara was about to go away. A minute later Gaara turned to leave, seemingly calm. Kankuro followed, but could have sworn he heard his brother mutter under his breath, "I need therapy." That will be all for this video. Be sure to like, subscribe, share, and comment down below for more videos. Goodbye.